Hello and welcome to the Be Floridian Now program. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about how to fertilize like a Floridian. And in our Be Floridian Now program, we talk a lot about how fertilizer winds up in the waterways. So you might wonder, wait a minute, fertilizer is in the yard. How does it wind up in the waterway? So let's take a look at the big picture and we can learn about how fertilizer does enter into the waterways. So let's take a look at what Florida looked like before people got here. In the far left picture, we see it was all natural with trees. When that was the case, we had water that would infiltrate the ground at 50%, which is ideal. We only had 10% runoff. Now, Florida's not always going to stay that way, of course, so we had some moderate building that happened. And at this point, we have 10 to 20% impervious surfaces. So at this point, it's going to change. Now we have 42% infiltration, 20% runoffs, because we've got those rooftops that are causing more runoff. Now Florida developed even further, and now we have subdivisions in Florida. With subdivisions, now what we're looking at is maybe 30 to 50% impervious surfaces. Now when we talk about impervious, we are talking about sidewalks, driveways, streets, rooftops, anything that the water doesn't penetrate and soak into the ground. So when you have subdivisions, we have quite a bit of those sidewalks and driveways and things like that. So now what we have is 30% runoff and only 35% infiltration. So you can see it's changed quite a bit from the beginning. Now we have more runoff and less infiltration. Now if Florida continues to develop to the point where we have 75 to 100% impervious surfaces, that means we are going to have 55% runoff. That means the rain that's coming down is not going to soak back into the ground and it's going to run off somewhere. And that's where the beginning of the problem is. So the more we build, the more runoff that's created. So you may have seen scenes like this where there is flooding in the streets. That's a huge problem. It damages property and people can get hurt. So a solution to the flooding problem is urban drainage. And we've constructed storm drains in order to remove the water away from buildings, away from houses, away from property. And these storm drains do a fantastic job of that. They pull the water away from structures, and a lot of people think it gets filtered or not even think about it. Out of sight, out of mind, it's down the drain. But what happens with that water is it drains directly into the waterways without any filtration. So that's where the problem starts. What goes down the drain ends up in the waterways. The more we build, the more water goes down the storm drain. The more water that goes down the storm drain, the more pollution that we have in the waterways. And that's the problem. So let's take a look at the big picture of the two cycles. So in the natural water cycle, we'll start on the far left. We've got the rain coming down, and that infiltrates the ground. It goes through the different soil layers, it gets cleaned, and then it winds up down in the aquifer or eventually winds up in the waterways. Then you've got the evaporation. It evaporates, comes back up, and comes down as rain. That's without human interference. Now let's look at the urban water cycle. A little bit different. You notice we still have rain on the left-hand side, but now you've got all that concrete. So you've got much, much less infiltration that's happening. So that means much less directly recharging the aquifer. So what happens is you've got more runoff. And as it runs off, it's picking up everything. It's picking up oil from the street, brake pad dust from the street. It's picking up things from the yard, and that's where the fertilizer comes in. It's picking up fertilizer that's on the grass. It's picking up everything, taking it down the storm drain and taking it out into the waterways. So you can see the natural water cycle really does differ from the urban water cycle. And we need to be aware of it and then do everything we can in order to get clean water to infiltrate the ground. That is our bottom line goal. So, now, we've got the fertilizer winding up in the waterways because it is running off the yard when it rains, goes down that storm drain. So, essentially what you've just done is you wasted money because you've spent all that money on the fertilizer. You wanted to make the yard green, and it literally just went down the drain. Not only have you wasted money, but now your fertilizer is contaminating the waterways. And let's take a look at what does happen when that fertilizer gets into the waterways. So one of the things that happens is algae blooms. So let's make the connection. So fertilizer makes green things grow. That's the whole purpose. You put it on the yard. Well, when it gets to the waterways, It does the same thing, except the green stuff in the water is algae. So what's going to happen is the fertilizer, it's the nitrogen in the fertilizer that's going to make that algae grow. And then you get algae blooms. Nobody wants to go kayaking or paddleboarding in that. But not only that, but as the algae grows, it depletes the oxygen in the water. As the oxygen is depleted, that means it leads to fish kills because the fish breathe the oxygen in the water. So fertilizer leads to algae. Algae leads to lack of oxygen. Lack of oxygen leads to fish kills. But it doesn't stop there. What also happens is this algae creates a layer on top of the water, which creates a dead zone. What that means is the light is no longer able to penetrate the water. That's a problem because the seagrass that's on the bottom needs the light to grow. So when you have this blanket of algae on top, the seagrass that's underneath dies. And when that happens, there's no place for the young fish to grow up, and there's nothing for the manatees to eat. So we can connect our fertilizer in our yard, going into the waterways, leading to algae, fish kills, and dead zones for fish and for manatees. So we really do have an impact on our waterways with what we do in our own backyards, literally. So here's the process one more time. Excess nutrients. So we're looking at nitrogen, hopefully not phosphorus, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the excess nutrients lead to excess aquatic weed and algae, reduced water clarity, reduced water quality, fish kills, and loss of recreation and loss of seagrass. So it's a whole process. And once you see the connection, then you understand better how you can impact the environment in your own backyard. So how do you do it? How do we fertilize like a Floridian so you can have a beautiful yard and still protect our waterways? And there's a lot of things you can do. Probably the first step and one of the best things is to do a soil test. The idea is you want to know what's going on in your yard so you can treat it exactly for what's going on. So the soil test will test the pH. It's going to look at the macronutrients. It's going to look at the phosphorus. It's going to look at the manganese and magnesium. And all of that is going to get sent to the lab and you'll get a report back. This is what's going on in your yard. When you know what's going on in your yard, then you can fertilize specifically for what your yard needs instead of guessing and just putting something out there. So step one, do a soil test. Step two is skip the fertilizer if you can. You may not need it at all. Hopefully you don't. But in the summertime in Florida, there is a ban on nitrogen and phosphorus during the summer. So from June 1st through September 30th, say no to nitrogen and phosphorus. The reason why is that's the rainy season. As we just saw, when the rains come, it washes the fertilizer off of your yard and down the storm drain and into the waterways. So there's a ban. So do not fertilize with nitrogen or phosphorus June 1st through September 30th. So what's the answer to do that? I know you want to fertilize, so we'll get to it. So never fertilize within 24 hours of a rain event. So always look at your weather forecast. If it's going to rain, don't fertilize. I know you've heard it. I want to water it in. You're not. You're watering it off. It's going to wash down the drain. If you read your bag, if your bag says to water in, use your sprinkler system to water it in the exact amount that it calls for. But if you wait for a rainstorm, it's going to wash it off and you've wasted your money and contaminated the waterways. So we talked about the ban June 1st through September 30th. So if you look at this little chart, you see January, February is gray. No reason to fertilize. The grass is dormant. March, April, May, it's starting to come out. That is the time to fertilize. June, July, August, September, don't fertilize. October, November, you can if you want to, but it's getting ready to go dormant. So this just gives you a visual picture of the year of when you can fertilize. March, April, May is your target zone for fertilizing because the yard is getting ready to grow. So, I know, you want to fertilize in the summer, right? Let me give you some alternatives of what you can do in the summer. So you can buy products that are nitrogen and phosphorus free. These can be applied anytime during the summer, but it should be based on your soil test. So whatever your soil test says you need. If you really want to make that more green, you can use iron. Iron enhances the green color, and you can use that during the summertime. Manganese can enhance disease resistance, potassium for overall plant health. Lime can correct the acidic soil, but again, based on your soil test, these are some alternatives for summer. Best solution is compost. When you compost in your yard, that you can apply anytime, and your nutrients are going to go especially into your landscape beds or even into your yard. So those are alternatives to summer. But let's say it's not summer anymore and you're ready to fertilize it springtime. What do you want to do? Remember, twice as nice, once in the spring, once in the fall. And what you want to do is you want to use the slow release nitrogen. Okay, now you may wonder, what on earth does that mean? So if you take a look at your fertilizer bag, look at your label. On the label, it's going to tell you the total percent of nitrogen. In this case, it is 16%. Somewhere on that label, on this one, it's down at the bottom, it tells you what percent is slowly available, slow release, or water insoluble. All those things mean slow release. At least half of your nitrogen should be slow release. Better if it's more. 60-65% is even better. But the idea is you put this in the ground, and then it's going to gradually release throughout the summer, so you still get nitrogen throughout the summer, but it can't run off because it's already penetrated. So your goal is apply in the spring, if you're going to, and apply with as much slow release nitrogen as you can. 50, 60, 65% is ideal, and reading the label will tell you the amount of slow release nitrogen that's available to you. And this kind of gives you a visual of why it's slow release. So you can see that it's got the coating around the outside that makes it water insoluble. In other words, the rain isn't going to dissolve it and rush it off. So this just kind of gives you a picture of what we're talking about when we talk about slow release and water insoluble. The next thing you need to know is to skip the phosphorus altogether. Now when you're looking at the fertilizer bag, you're going to see 3 numbers on the bag. The first number is N, that's nitrogen. The second number is P, that's phosphorus. The last number is K, and that is potassium. Your middle number, that phosphorus number, should always be 0 in Florida, unless your soil test identifies something different, because our soil already has phosphorus in it, and phosphorus is one of the main ingredients that's contaminating our waterways. So make sure your middle number is 0. The only reason it shouldn't be is if your soil test said that you need phosphorus. Maybe you have a special case. So middle number 0 is a good thing to remember. Skip the phosphorus. Okay, so how do you know if you are choosing the right fertilizer? So I know when I first moved to Florida, I just was overwhelmed by the fertilizer aisle, and at the end I just said never mind and grabbed a bag. Well, let's go through and take a look at how to read those numbers, and then you can pick a bag that's going to help you to have a beautiful yard. So if we look at the first set of numbers, if we have 29, 0, and 4. Okay, the 0 in the middle is good. We learned 0 phosphorus. 29, that nitrogen is way too high, and the potassium 4 is really low. So not a good combination. If you look at our next set of numbers, 18, 24, 12. Uh-oh, look at your middle number. It's 24. We said phosphorus has to be 0. So we don't do that one either. If we look at our next one, 16, 0, 8. Now we're looking better. So we've got nitrogen is at 16, our middle number is 0, and our potassium number is 8. Ideally, you want potassium to be half of nitrogen. So 1608 is a pretty good combination. So that's kind of a little bit more about how to read the bag and what to look for in those numbers. Okay, so next we want to know, how much fertilizer do you need? So it depends on what plants you're fertilizing. And St. Augustine is going to need a little bit more. Zoysia is going to need a little bit more. And Bahia is going to need a little bit less. So it's not blanket. It depends on what you have as turf grass. So you want to read the label on your fertilizer bag to know what you've got. And you want to research the type of grass you have so you know how much to apply. Fertilizer timing, we mentioned this a little bit, but don't apply fertilizer when it's going to rain. And it's actually prohibited to do it if there's a flood warning, tropical storm warning, hurricane warning, or any of that. And it's also prohibited when the soil is saturated. So remember, water washes it off, doesn't water it in. The next thing to keep in mind is if you have a water body somewhere on your property, a retention pond, a pond, anything else, you want to remember the Fab 15. What that means is you want to keep fertilizer at least 15 feet away from any body of water. So you wonder, how are you going to do that? Well, a good solution is to put a no-mow zone, a barrier all the way around your waterway. So in these pictures you can see there's a native plant barrier right around the water. What does it do? It creates a beautiful area of plants and flowers, and it also creates an area where you're not going to fertilize and you're not going to mow. Two benefits to that is the fertilizer doesn't drain directly into the waterway. The roots uptake any nutrients that may be washing from your yard. So the roots of those plants are going to uptake the nutrients so it doesn't contaminate your waterway. And a bonus, it's really pretty to have flowers around your waterway. So it's a good solution, but either way, make sure that the fertilizer does not get into the water. And we'll talk about the deflector shield and how you can do that. And also make sure the grass clippings don't get into the water, because grass clippings are also nitrogen. And when you have this barrier set up around, then you know fertilizer and grass clippings are not going to end up in your waterway, and your waterway is going to look prettier and be healthier. So we've been talking about plants and planting native plants all around your waterway. How do you know what plants to select? And the answer is right plant, right place. So if you know your soil, then you know what your soil is going to take. And there are all kinds of native plants that you can plant, and they're going to thrive. The beauty behind native plants, and this is a brochure that we have here in the county, and you can see and select native plants. The beauty is they're native, so they don't take a lot of work. You don't have to fertilize them or water them. Once they're established, they're good to go. And that means you can relax and not spend so much time trimming and pruning and taking care of your landscape, because they're natural and native, and they're going to thrive here in Florida. And there are many that are beautiful that will attract bees and butterflies and just make your landscape area beautiful. So when you choose the right plant, put it in the right place, you have low maintenance yard that is absolutely beautiful and does not require fertilizer. So choose the right plant, put it in the right place. And something else you can do is, if you have quite a bit of turf grass in your yard, you can kick the lawn habit. And what I mean by that is cut out a section of your grass area and replace it with one of these native plant collections. And what that's going to do is have an area of your yard that you don't need to fertilize, and it's going to beautify because you're going to add flowers that are native that are absolutely beautiful. So you can add that butterfly garden or that pollinator garden by cutting out a section of your turf grass and adding these beautiful native flowers. And it's a great solution to reduce the amount of fertilizer that you will need in your yard, because you have a reduced amount of turf grass. For your turf grass, one secret is to raise the blade when you're mowing the grass. So if your grass is mowed too short, it stresses the grass, it stresses the plants. That means it's going to attract pests, disease, and it's going to have less energy to grow deep roots. So if you leave the grass blades higher, the roots are going to go down deeper. It's going to make the plant stronger, so you need less fertilizer. And it's going to make your yard more beautiful. So keep the blade higher than you might expect. So higher blade, healthier grass, less fertilizer. We talked about the clippings briefly before. Just a quick reminder. Those grass clippings, they wind up on your driveway, they wind up on your sidewalk. What do you do with them? Please don't blow them in the street. Blow them back on your yard. Two reasons why. One, if they wind up in the street, they're going to go down the storm drain. That's extra nitrogen again that's going into the waterways, that's going to lead to algae blooms. The other thing is, if you sweep them back into your yard, that's free fertilizer for you. Those grass clippings are nitrogen. That nitrogen is going to penetrate the soil and provide nutrients to your grass. So those grass clippings need to go right back onto your grass, free fertilizer for you, and it helps to save the waterways. So, and also just make sure those grass clippings never go directly into the waterway when you're mowing. But they're a free fertilizer, so don't let them go into the waterways. Keep them for yourself. If you are fertilizing, you may use a spreader like the one in the picture. You want to make sure that your fertilizer has a deflector shield or an edge guard, and that is that barrier that goes around and it controls where the fertilizer falls. If you do a broadcast spread, it's going to wind up on your sidewalk, driveway, and the waterways. When you have the deflector, you have more control over where that fertilizer is placed, and it doesn't wind up in places where you don't want it. So make sure your deflector is in place and you use it to protect the waterways and the hard surfaces. If for some reason you do get fertilizer on a hard surface, sweep it back into your grass. Do not leave it on the driveway, because the next rain, it's going to wash out and go down the storm drain and contaminate the waterway. So just make sure the fertilizer is on the grass and never on a hard surface and never directly into any waterways. And a deflector shield is a good way to make sure that that happens. So, now you understand why it's important to fertilize the right way. How do you get your community involved? Well, make sure that you inform people that there are flyers in all of your local hardware stores that teach you how to fertilize. You're going to see a flyer that looks like this: How to Fertilize Like a Floridian. And it's going to tell you a lot of what you learned in the workshop, but you can pick it up in any of your local hardware stores, and it'll give you all of these tips, and your neighbors can do the same, and that way you can be informed about the best way to fertilize so your yard is nice and the waterways aren't contaminated. Visit our booths. We go out in the community quite a bit to tell you all about these things, so come out and see us at any of the local fairs and festivals, and we'd be glad to share that information with you. Check out the libraries. There's information in the libraries about how to fertilize like a Floridian, and in City Hall. But there's a lot of things that you can do. Okay, that sounds like a bit much. Let's start small. What can you do? Plant a tree. It's probably the best thing you can do. When you plant a tree, you're taking out turf grass in part of your yard. You're adding shade to your yard, which is going to reduce your cooling costs for your house. You're adding oxygen to the air. You're reducing carbon dioxide. If you plant a tree, it is one very simple thing you can do for the environment. It helps the waterways because the roots of that tree are going to take up some of the nutrients that might wind up in the waterway. So a simple thing you can do: plant a tree. Second, plant a butterfly garden. Take out that patch of grass, put in that butterfly garden, and you'll fertilize less and have beautiful flowers. And another thing you can do in your yard, if you have an area where you want to have a pathway around your house, just make sure that it is a porous pathway. You can use mulch, you can use gravel, stepping stones, and if you take out the concrete if you have it, because again, that creates runoff. But when you have a porous pathway, it adds a beautiful feature to your yard and reduces, again, the amount that you need to fertilize. So that's something that you can do in a day. Okay, let's say you're going to go big. You can do it in a weekend. That's where you take out the whole section of your yard and add native plants. You can also create a landscape bed or an island where you have large shrubs and then surrounded by mulch, and that's another whole section that you don't need to fertilize. And you can also install micro irrigation instead of whole yard irrigation for your landscape, and you reduce the amount of water and the amount of fertilizer that you need. So those are some bigger projects. Be sure to check out the BeFloridianNow.org. Go to Quick Start, and it'll give you some tips of things you can do here. And then if it's a rainy day, you're probably thinking, I don't have to do anything. It's a rainy day. I've got a to-do list for you, even for rainy days. So what you can do is figure out what plants you want to put in your yard. So check out the Be Floridian Now landscape guide. Check out the native plant. And make your shopping list of the plants that you want. Start planning now. Draw it out on a sketch pad and see what kind of plants you want your garden to look like. So even if it is a rainy day, it's not an excuse. You can still take a step and do something to help make your yard Florida friendly with Florida friendly plants and things that don't require so much fertilizer. So there's a whole lot you can do to help the waterways have a beautiful yard, and you can be Floridian now. Thank you.